think we're going to get started now. I hope everybody's gotten something to eat. Feel free to get something to eat or drink even while we're still talking. Don't think you have to stay in your seat. If you're hungry, thirsty, please keep going with that. I want to thank everyone for coming today to honor my father and celebrate his life. I'm absolutely blown away at how many people from out of state and across the country have come just to be with us today. I love that there are people here from all different aspects of his life. Bailey is going to start us off. When he's done, he will bring the microphone around to everyone that wishes to speak. You can stay at your seat. Bailey.
Hello. Good evening. How does this sound, everybody? Is this good? It's happy? We're happy? That's good. I'm Bailey. I'm Pa's, my grandfather's grandson. It's common when I talk with my peers. We don't really know people until we're older. Like when we're young, they kind of look very one-dimensional and simple, and it isn't until we grow up and we meet more people that we realize that they're actual people. Our parents are actual people, and they're not just these amalgamations of anything. But so I didn't really honestly know my grandfather that well until like the last few years. It wasn't until I had moved out and was working that I came back to see my grandparents, and I talked to them for hours on end, and I'd learn about who they are and who they were. So I don't have that many memories that are that strong, but I appreciate the time that I did get with them, and I remember working with Pa and him teaching me the family spaghetti sauce recipe that's significantly better than the one that my mom made for me. It's very good. It's very good. I like all the port and the lack of mushrooms, but that's just me. But through the process and talking with him, I admired his stoic and his patient intellectual ability, and his way of telling me that I was wrong without cruelty. And he really set an example for how to communicate with people and to share ideas, and his patience for my youthful ignorance. So I really only knew Pa through talking with him directly and hearing some stories from my mom and others that I met. So I really hope that through you guys I get to learn a little bit more about my grandfather and who he was, so I can have a more complete and holistic and multi-dimensional look of who. Hello, fantastic. So what you say doesn't have to be emotional or grandiose or make us wail and cry and scream hallelujah, but I'd like to hear a little bit and give you a sentence or two or a memory or something that he imparted onto you, or the first time you met, or anything, no matter how big or small. I'd really appreciate it. So without further ado, whoever would feel moved to speak first, of course, I'll bring it to you. You can stand or sit or dance around or take your shirt off, I don't care.
I think I took my shirt off there with you. Well, I met my dad when I was born. But for me, my dad was my best friend. I think a lot of guys feel that way, but I was saying I never had a fight with him. Well, one time I did, but I know I was wrong. And like 5 minutes later, I was like, okay. And I don't think anybody ever understood me as well as he did. And what I miss most about it is his advice and his good judgment. And I could talk to him about a lot of stuff and ask him for his opinion, and he would tell me truthfully if it was good or bad, and he'd say, well, gee, that's really stupid. Or actually the way he would do it, he says things in one-word answers, stupid. So, but we said it was stupid. It was a stupid idea. Yeah, it was, and because he always had good judgment. And his mind always stayed flexible, even at the end. I enjoyed working with him because we both thought about how to do a job better. And he was always open to new ideas, and he loved learning. And his favorite thing was watching someone doing something they were an expert at. It could be whittling or whatever. He just loved seeing somebody do something that they were good at. And I know when he was a kid, he wanted to be an astronomer. And when he got older, he wanted to teach people to read. And I was a conversation partner at a Korean church to help people with their English. And a couple of times I wasn't able to go, so he stepped in my place. And he did a great job, and in truth, I know they'd rather have him than me. Yeah. Actually, one time, somebody actually did tell me that. They did. It was I regret now that I didn't go fishing with him more, because I liked fishing. He told me that's what he liked doing with me the most. But we did fun things together. Like, this might sound boring to you all, but we watched I remember it was just he and I, and we were watching a YouTube video on math. And that was really cool, and he was good at that. And we would go to movies. And we saw the Blair Witch Project together. I don't know if you all remember that. And he had two reactions to the movie. One was he turned to me during the movie and he asked, when does this get scary? And the other one was, he was really upset because how casually the guys in the movie would curse in front of the girl. And that really did upset him very much. And people might think he's a dinosaur for that, but I don't. Because that's the kind of character he had. When my brother was born, a lot of men will abandon their wife, abandon their family. But he didn't. And he was good with people. And that's why he was good with people. He treated them fairly, and he was forgiving. And his eyes got, very bad later in life. He had to look down when he was walking so he wouldn't trip. But we had a funny thing happen where Mom, Dad, and I, we were watching a Korean drama together. It was a historical drama. And I would read the subtitles for them, and I would always say, so-and-so is saying something, is saying that. But I'm not very good with faces, and so if the person was wearing a different costume, I would lose track of who they were. But funny enough, Dad would know, oh, that's this one guy. So, yeah, that was weird. I mean, the guy, he was versus blind, he could see. And I'm the one that's reading subtitles and the best eyes in the house, and I had, hey, who's this guy? Was he? So, I dream of my dad a fair amount, and it makes me feel good when I see him. And I guess the one fear I have today is that after this, I won't dream of him anymore, and so I hope not. But Jesus has said that we can't imagine the afterlife, and I'll take his word for it. And time is an illusion. How we see time is not really, it's an illusion. I'm not going to go into physics of it. But with my brother's recent death, I believe my brother's now normal, and that there's a good chance that if it's not Jesus meeting him, that it's my dad. And I'm happy to know that my brother's first person he'll meet, or a very good chance the first person he'll meet and the first person he'll have a real conversation with is with my dad. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you.
funny how things happen. I started my career in printing. It was about 50 years ago. I was working for the Printing Association. They represented the printers in the metropolitan Washington area. The executive director, Doris Hall, she'd been the executive director for a long time. She pulled me aside one day and mentioned to me that there was a printer. It was not like the normal printers. Most of the printers were primarily concentrated on printing, and that was it. But she said there was this guy, Bob Ostrowski. He was well-read, well-traveled, smart. And I thought about that, and then coincidentally, about a month later, the Printing Association had a conference down in Tides Inn, Virginia. They call it a conference. It's really just a speaker would talk for 2 hours, and the rest of the time was spent playing golf, meeting other printers and talking. That's really what the convention was about. That first night they had a dart tournament, and it was drew names out of a hat, and Bob and I happened to we drew together and started playing darts. We won the first match, and then we were sitting around talking. And Bob he was a really interesting guy. Had a lot of stories. We played our second match, won that also. Sat down and kept talking, and I think at that point we developed a real friendship for each other. He told a story that night how he got into printing. He said he applied for a job as a messenger. And he always called it a messenger. I think he probably meant like a driver, but I guess back then they were called messengers. The guy who was interviewing told him, "You're really not dressed good enough to become a messenger, but we can put you in the print shop." And that's how Bob got started in printing, because he didn't qualify to become a messenger. Fast forward probably 5 years after that, I was working for a printing company, and we were going through a strike, and Bob Ostrowski and Expedite volunteered to do our work while we had to strike. So we rekindled our friendship at that point. We'd give him the work, and it was always done right. It was done on time. That printing company went out of business, and I asked Bob if I could have a job at Expedite, because I met the people down there, and we seemed to get along real good. He hired me instantaneously and said, "Why don't you start in 2 weeks?" I came back in 2 weeks, and Doris Hall was right. He liked traveling a lot. He wasn't there. Not only he wasn't there, he didn't tell anybody he hired me. So they asked me what I was hired to do. I said, "Well, we never really talked about it." Eventually, I watched Bob take that company. When I started there, it was probably 40 people. He built that company up to, ultimately we moved to Maryland, probably became a 100-man shop, 3 shifts. And Bob really ran that shop with ease, and it was a pleasure watching him, how he dealt with people, how he dealt with customers, and I learned an awful lot from that. After that, in 1991, two really good things happened to me. I married his daughter, Tamara, and a couple months later, we opened up Doloff Printing. And all the time I've known him, I don't think we ever had an argument. We did have one disagreement one time. There was a customer, it's called Columbia Association, about 5 miles from the shop. Big association, represented a big town. And we printed a job for him. I know we did it right. They said we did it wrong and they wanted us to reprint it and pay for the postage. And I told Bob, I said, I'm not going to reprint that job. We did exactly what we were supposed to do. Bob said, if you don't reprint that job, we'll never do that. We'll never do another job for Columbia Association. Well, it's been 33 years and we still have not done another job. It's been an honor and a privilege to know Bob. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next?
I met Bob through his lovely wife, Joanna. I'm Patty Gross. And Joe was a member of the Garden Club. And Doloff Printing was printing the program for us for many, many years. And I would go over to their house and leave the disc for them when I took over from, Joan, did I take over from you doing all the typing and everything? Okay, I took over for Joan. I've done it for so long that I forget those details. And we would meet on their front porch. And if they weren't home, I would leave the disc, and then sometimes Robert and Laddie would drop the books off to me, sometimes Bob would. But one day I went over and they were worried about something about their pond. And we started up by the pond and we were talking, and I just turned around because I was so focused on getting this disc to the porch bench that I never paid attention to anything else. But when I was up by the pond and we turned around, I looked at their magnificent home and I said, oh my goodness, this house is beautiful. And Joan and Bob said, well, we can't show it to you now because we're in the midst of painters. And she said to me, but when that's finished, I'll invite you. So a couple years went by. I thought, boy, that's some painting job in 2 years. And sure enough, the phone call comes, and Joan says, would you and your husband like to come and see the house? And I said, oh, Joan, I would just love that. So Bob and Joan graciously invited us in, and I'll tell you, Ray and I went on a trip around the world. They took us to every room and they pointed out all these wonderful, wonderful possessions that they had shipped over from this country and that country. Well, I'm just a plain little pumpkin, and this was like I was in a fairy tale. And I think we were there several hours, but we went from the top to the bottom. And I told him it was like Hillwood. If you've gone to Hillwood, it was like a smaller version, not too much smaller. What, honey?
She said you were exaggerating.
I'm not exaggerating. It was just beautiful. Gold faucets, painted sinks. I was just in awe of all the beautiful things. And then, it wasn't Bob, but it was Joanna that said, Bob designed this house. So he was a very humble man, and that's how we got to know each other. We would go and see them sometimes, and after Bob died, she called and she said, I've got a toilet that's running like crazy. I said, oh, Ray will come over and he'll look at your toilet. Well, that toilet wasn't running at all. We could not find it. But it did turn out that there were some problems. So your grandfather was just a delight to be around. And it didn't matter whether you were on their scale or if you were on a little bit of a lower scale, he treated you the same. And your family has been very kind to the St. Louis Garden Club. And I'm so appreciative to have Joanne's friendship and to have known your grandfather.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, just like to introduce myself. My mom is Joanne's sister, and she has since passed. This is my sister Tracy, my husband Michael, and we knew Uncle Bob infrequently because he came to weddings, he came to see my mom and dad once in a while. They went on a cruise together. They had some business things together, and one of the things that we both note about him, he was very gentle, just a sweet soul. He never raised his voice to me. I probably would have done something in return if he would have raised it to me. But anyway, he was just a gem. And those two pictures, on the left and the right, hung in my mom's home for probably 40 years. Forever, as long as we can remember. And so he was a great artist. He was a tender soul. And we're sorry that he's gone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My name is Bill Wright, my wife Grace, my son Stephen. We were next door neighbors with Bob in the early 60s. That's when we moved. When was that?
10 years.
10 years, 10, yes. We built our house maybe at the same time or wherever, but I know Tamar and my son Stephen, they would play a lot together in their very young days. I was a musician with the National Symphony at that time. I'm retired now. So Bob and I didn't have a lot of time to do things together, but we did associate because we were next door neighbors. Our houses were probably built pretty close at the same time. But between the houses, we had a lot of land that was just open space. So I think Bob had the bright idea of let's build a wall, to just separate our lot so we could have a little more privacy. So we did that, So we built the wall, and my son, he said, he was like 3 years old. He said he gave us a brick to put to help with it. So, but I do remember Bob briefly because we did not associate, because my job with music was totally different than what he was doing. But that was just one of the few remembrances I have of Bob. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Steve Wright. I'm the son. Tamar and I were born in that house, in those houses back in Occidental, and so I've known them my whole life. And but some of the fond memories I have, I remember Bob driving a Studebaker back when there were Studebakers, and we had so much fun, riding in it and stuff like that. There was another incident too where Mrs. Conway had driven up in the driveway This is another neighbor of ours. And she pulled up in the driveway and got out of the car and everything, and Joey was playing with it, with the brake. And the brake let go, and the car went down the driveway and and through a rock garden and then down and made a U-turn into the, so it didn't really cause any damage or anything like that. But oh, Mr. Ostrowski was like, he was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. But I have very fond memories of him. And the neighbor that moved in after them, one of the things that she just marveled at the artistry of the house that was done, because Bob had done so much and done so many things to the house in the time. Built the patio, he built the walls, he built the they built the over the garage, the room over the garage, and she refused to touch anything. She thought of painting something. No, she wasn't going to do that. She did not want to affect the artistry, but she really did love that house. So anyway.
Next. He's behind us then. Oh.
I'll go next.
I'm Adele DeVoe. I'm with Adele's Old Fashioned Cleaning Service. Best cleaning service you're gonna get if you need cleaning service. Anyway, I'm not kind of advertised. But let me tell you how I met them. I was out one day giving out some flyers, doing some advertising in the community. And I went through the office and I met Tamara. And she took my blood, she took the flyer, and she says, if we need a cleaning service, we'll just give you a call. So anyway, about a couple of years it went past, and I didn't really hear from them, because I knew they already had a cleaning service. So one day I got a phone call from Joan. And she says, we need a cleaning service. I said, oh, okay, I'll come in. So I came in. At the time, I had other cleaning services in Laurel, about a couple of minutes from Bob for Dollar Printing. So I came in, I had my work clothes on, I was kind of sloppy looking, like the person that's under the bridge. So when Bob saw me, he said, he didn't say anything to me, right? So eventually, they didn't hire me to clean the office. So Joan called me back, then they had another cleaning service to come in. And she says, Adele, they didn't do a good job at all. And they didn't know what they was doing. So I'm gonna bring you on in here. He said, but my husband told me the reason why he didn't want you to come clean that building, because you look like something that came, he didn't say it that way, I'm just doing it my way. You look like something that came underneath the bridge. I said, oh, okay. But I'm just gonna share this with you. Needless to say, I ended up getting the contract, cleaning the building. The one thing I did learn, one thing about things that like, your first impression is very, very important. So as of today, my first impression is totally different today. And you can look at it today. It's totally different. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Bob's early years in printing was to build the print shop. A little closer to the camera. So he had this way of getting younger talent. So he would go to the local high schools, and he would enter those high schools, mostly the Votech or the graphics part of the school, and he would advertise to those kids. Well, 44 years ago, that was me. I was in a high school, and Bob came in and hired me, so I was one of his, I don't know, I might have been one of his first or younger guys, so ever since, but Bob's not only been an owner, a manager, a supervisor, he's been a mentor and a leader. Very talented. I've spent my whole life working for Bob. He's the only job, other than being a dishwasher at Ponderosa, it's the only job I've ever had. So I've learned a lot from Bob. Probably, you can almost see he's like a father to me. He'd buy me lunch, give me my favorite candy bar, which is a Butterfinger.
Good to know.
And I'll miss him. God bless Bob.
Bob, I worked for a bunch of other printing companies for 12 years or so, and they all went out of business. Got hired by Duluth. I've been there for 30 years since then. Early in my time with Bob, he, as most people have said, quiet, smart, didn't ever raise his voice. Never heard him raise his voice. About a year or so into my first meeting him, I get a phone call down there, and it's from my mortgage company. And I'm going, what? It gets taken out of my bank account. Everything. I just take my check, I put it in the bank account. My ex-wife used to give me like $60 a week for gas and lunch. That's how I live. You know, we had some kids or whatever. I didn't know she handled the finances. Probably not too well. Well, they were putting a foreclosure on me. And the first thing that Bob said was, he heard me on the phone, I'm going, what is this and everything? He just happened to be walking by and says, George, what do you need? He gave me a loan right then. And not really knowing me that long, which is just amazing. But he did say one thing. He says, George, you've got to watch your own finances. And right then, I opened a separate bank account, put my check in there, and gave my ex-wife
$60.
lunch money for the kids, whatever. And it was such good advice, and I've lived at the same place for 40 years. But just knowing him, that he had the heart just to go, and I didn't know him that long, but it's just the way he was. And, you know, just this guy, I read this and it said, tired. I remember going to the retirement dinner we had for him. I couldn't believe it's 2008. It's just time flies. And, you know, I do miss the guy. He did stop in every once in a while, and it's always, it's Bob. I mean, the guy was a great guy. There's no doubt. They don't make people like him too much anymore. They made more people like Bob, we'd have a less odd problem in this world. Just want to thank you.
Hi, my name's Liz. I'm married to Bob's grandson, Dustin. Pa, as his grandchildren affectionately call him, was, as a lot of people have remarked today, an incredibly warm and kind person. From the first time I met him, he allayed my nerves and made me feel welcome in his home and family. The kind of man that even in his 90s was offering me his seat to make me more comfortable. He always had this little twinkle in his eye when you spoke to him that let him know that he was listening and he really cared about what you had to say. Even when we were visiting him in the hospital near the end, he'd make a point with every visit to thank us for coming. One evening, when Dustin and I were visiting my mom and Pa, we were talking about music, and Pa asked if I would sing something. And there's a bit of a generational gap, so I asked him what he'd like me to sing, and he named a song I didn't know, and so I told him I'd learn it for him and sing it during a future visit, and so I did. And in his memory, if my voice will allow me, and if you'll indulge me, I'd like to sing just part of it now. Take the ribbon from your hair, shake it loose and let it fall. Lay it soft against my skin, like the shadows on the wall. Come and lay down by my side, out of sight, and it's sad to be alone. Help me make it through the night. So I think that song really demonstrates that he would have loved today, that we could all be here together to take the ribbons from our hair and help each other make it through the night of our grief. There's no right way to grieve, but I think he'd be immensely grateful for and proud of all the love that went into today. Even just getting to go through his art, to display it, and felt like such a gift because I got to know him that much better. Thank you all for being here and for sharing your stories.
I came to this area from Cleveland, Ohio in 1976. I was in a family business that made printing ink. And we joined the Printing Association. Eventually got Bob Doloff along the way at the Printing Association. But I just want to say that my father he wanted me out in the field. No office. That's the way I was raised. In fact, I started at 13 in the shipping. He wanted us out in the field. The point being, that's all I did. So I got to see every printer in Washington, D.C. In fact, when I retired, I wrote a book, which was somewhat Red Ties, Memories of the Printing Industry, just to say, and there were 1,100 people that, I'm sorry, 10,000, and then there's a senior moment. But anyway, 10,000 people in my book that I literally listed their names. So, okay, the point being, Bob Ostrowski was exceptional. I knew all the presidents, I knew all the vice presidents, I knew sales managers, I knew plant managers. And Bob Ostrowski was just an amazing man. Just takes my breath away.
Thank you.
I'm Cal's wife, Sandy, and I would just like to add a little thing, that Joanne and Bob were so warm and welcoming to everybody. And of course, I was a stranger, and they just took me into their arms and helped me get to know a lot of people. And one particular day, they invited us to their gorgeous home. I've never seen a house like this. It was magnificent. It had everything. And as we walked in, I could hear the piano playing. And I thought, oh my gosh, who is here playing this piano? It's beautiful. And as I got into the foyer where the piano was, I realized that they must have a ghost because there wasn't anybody sitting down playing it. And I had never, ever seen a player piano in someone's home that was playing. I've never forgotten it. It was absolutely wonderful. Do you remember that, Julie? It was wonderful. So it was a blessing to have met you and Bob. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I knew Bob and Joanne socially. That's how we met. Joanne and I were taking aerobic dancing, and we were doing it mostly just the women, of course. And we were doing it Sylvia Dress had a tennis court. We'd be outside on a tennis court. So Joanne and I became good friends, and we thought, this is fun. Why don't we double date with our husbands? We could do that. And so that was the beginning of a nice friendship, doing social things. And since you're talking about that house, I will tell you, we took dancing lessons. We were doing the foxtrot, the rumba, the cha-chas, and right in the foyer, we would practice. The four of us will practice right there in that foyer. Talk about it being beautiful, it was. But what fun we had. And we frequently, over the years, spent New Year's Eve together. My husband loved to cook. And so he would have a dinner party. Bob would get dressed in his tuxedo and come over all dressed up. He'd come early in the afternoon to participate in the cooking. So Charlie, like, they were drinking and cooking and just having a wonderful time in their tuxedos. But what fun we did. We shared a lot of good times and many laughs. So, yes, Bob, you were all the things they have said today. Gentle, smart, and really a lot of fun and just so good to be with. You always did. We had the crab feast at the house and always was just very hospitable. So he was a star.
I'd like to read some of the memories that people shared with me that couldn't be with us today. Bear with me. This is from Pina, which is Liz's mother, Dustin's mother-in-law. She said, we met your dad and mom the first time was at our house for Liz and Dustin's graduation engagement party. Your dad and mom were so lovely. Your dad seemed to be enjoying himself, was so relaxed and happy. When I think of him, I just smile. He was so kind, and he was a wonderful father, husband, just loving, sweet man. Thinking of your dad, he's smiling down on his family all together today. I wish I could be there to celebrate with you, all in the memory of your dad. Love, Bob and Pina. Angela Rogers, who is my mother's sister's granddaughter. There's going to be a quiz. And we grew up together, hung out a lot when they'd go down to South Carolina to visit, and it was always a wonderful time. Good food down there. Memories of Bob. Let's see, she said some nice things, and then let's see, what I most remember about Bob was how nice he was. He always had a smile, a kind word, and a sense of calmness about him. We could be loud and rambunctious, and it never seemed to matter to Bob. I've never heard him raise his voice or speak ill of anyone. He was a wonderful soul. My mother and father were so very fond of him too. I wish they were here to pay their respects as well. But I know that they were there to welcome him into heaven when he arrived. We are blessed to have known him. His best friend, Don Seminara's son, Tony, oldest son, Tony, his best friend from the Army, said, it has been amazing to me that so many of my dad's friends ended up going into the printing industry. I also got the printing bug. I started in high school and then a small shop in Silver Spring, and as a lithograph in the Navy. After the Navy, I worked for 31 years in corporate press. Bob and I met for lunch one day in 1979, and he was trying to get me to come to work at his shop. That's the last time I remember seeing him. Bob was always a gentleman and very polished. Of all of my father's friends, he really stood out. And then Laura is here today, and her brother couldn't be here, and he wrote, is a childhood friend from our first neighborhood in the 60s. Oh, I shouldn't say that. Let's see. Oh, he had given, there's a book over there that he painted. It was a gift to both he and Laura as a birthday gift, if you have a chance to walk over. His childhood his childhood home burned, and it was one of the few things that survived it. And he's had it in his home ever since, and he was gracious enough to share it with us. On the back it says, "From Tamara's daddy." And he gave it to them as so that was that. Carol Ann Ostrowski Bunk, oldest child of John Ostrowski, who is, my dad was the baby, and John Ostrowski was his oldest brother, so there was a big spread. And there's a picture of them in the son brother, if you see him, the little one standing and then the big one, that's his older brother and him. Anyway, all my memories of Uncle Bob are special. Visits to Windber that excited one so much. I felt like they were Hollywood royalty. Generosity at Christmas when my siblings and I were growing up. Dinner at their apartment in DC and later visiting the Oxon Hill home. I was so proud of him and his business accomplishments, having such a beautiful wife and family, and his being the best looking of all the Ostrowski brothers. Sorry, Dad. The last 17 years were exchanges of birthday and Christmas cards and phone calls about once a month. The kindness he showed to me all my life made me feel so special. Uncle Bob, I love you. I've loved you all of your life, and I will love you and Aunt Joanne for the rest of mine. Love to you and Lad, your niece, Carol Ann Ostrowski Bunk. And I have one more from Jean Carty. Sorry, I'm just trying to get to the Zoom. I think this is just basically an email, sorry. I should have gone through it beforehand, so I was not prepared. All right, so.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Cheryl. I'm a friend of Tamara and Bob and their children. And I did not know Bob very well, but I was doing horse shows with the children and with Tamara for years. And some of these horse shows were on farmland, which involves a lot of hills and dales. And Bob usually showed up at a lot of these horse shows, which was very difficult for an older person. So he really supported his grandchildren. And I personally believe that this is a very strong family, and everybody in this family is a very special person. And special people come from special people. So I'm very glad to know all of them, and I'm very proud of all of them.
Most of my memories of Bob and the dealings with the Ostrowskis, my name is David Rogers. My father, Carol, was a cousin to Joan. But a lot of my, and I'm not going to go on about it here, but a lot of my childhood involved visits to relatives where it was really strange. It'd start off okay. And then they'd all start yelling and screaming at each other, and I'd be rushed out to the car and we had to leave. And I'm thinking, did I do that? But it wasn't. But when we would go to the Ostrowskis and visit them probably 3 or 4 times a year, Joan would cook some wonderful food. I never had any idea what it was, but I loved it, okay? And just as a child, I just felt like I was a wonderland. I would spend time in their house just staring. And this was the house they had back in Oxon Hill, off St. Barbara's Road, in California Contemporary, probably when you were a neighbor. And they just had such cool things in the house that I was like, can I touch this? I might break it, but I better not touch it. I would go through this kind of like things with myself. But just, the thing is, I've been involved over the years in a lot of ministry and things that are guiding men and helping men to be better men and men to their families and so forth. The example that I kept seeing of Bob with his family really is like what you're trying to achieve with that. The man, I never heard him raise his voice. And I'm like, I gave him reason to raise his voice. And he just didn't. He just stayed so calm about everything all the time. And the way a man leads his family makes the rest of the family thrive as well. Kind of like what you were talking about. How everybody's turned out so special and so forth. So I just really appreciate that demeanor and so forth in him. I hadn't seen the family for years. You know, we all had gone our separate ways. My parents were divorced when I was 15. Everything kind of just fell apart as far as relatives getting together and stuff. But I worked at this high-end audio store in University Heights. Next to us was Lido Pizza. And I walk out there, I go over to Lido's, I'm gonna go get a pizza or something, and there's Bob sitting there. Hadn't seen him in probably 15 years or whatever. And then, David, what are you doing here? You know, and we just had a wonderful conversation. So just really appreciate that peace and demeanor and the calmness. And you know, I was at a men's conference years ago where they talked about the fact that if you're in the office like 70 hours a week and you're not with your family and doing some of the things you should be doing there, when you're finally on your deathbed, you don't lay there regretting that, gosh, I wish I had spent more time in the office. And I'm just thinking that a lot of what I saw with Bob's character and so forth caused me to want to be, though I'm terrible, I'm in the office a lot, but just to want to be that way. And just another good memory about you guys, I loved your little dachshunds. Oh, later on, I had to get a dachshund later on. Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember their names, but they were fun dogs. All right.
Thanks so much.
And those dogs came from Tina and Tracy's mom because she bred them in California. And then they would ship them. I think we got a couple dogs, 3 dogs from you total, right? And they shipped them on the plane by themselves over to us. Anyway, I just wanted to finish the story.
Hello, I don't have my notes. I will do my best to remember. I'm Dustin, son of Tamara, grandson of Bob. When I was in elementary school, I used to go over to their house weekly. They'd pick me up from school, and I'd go back to their house, and I'd have lots of fun. Ed Robert was there too. He was pretty good. We always like do different like crafts and activities and stuff, and it was a lot of fun. After we do whatever activities we were doing, one of them, my mom or Pa would have spent lots of time putting a lot of effort and love into making some dinner that was always really good. My favorite of which was the spaghetti sauce that Bailey mentioned before. And I concur with him that to a young child, the fact that it had port wine in it was like, that's a classier form of the sauce. But I do love my mom's sauce as well. I used to love going over there, eating, that we'd always have it over rigatoni, and I'd eat it. I'd have like thirds, sometimes fourths, just until I was just like sick. There's a little bit more to that story, but I don't quite remember. Anyways, after dinner, we clear the table, and it was school time, so I have to do my homework on that table. I remember Pa would always help me. Usually with the math homework, I really struggled with that when I was younger. And he was very patient in a lot of the ways that you all have described, and really helped me foster a love of math that I think I attribute some of that to him, that I went on to really enjoy math in middle school and high school. After dinner, maybe some other activities, and then go to sleep. I would sleep in a sleeping bag in the room. I'm not entirely sure how that ended up happening, but usually I would end up sleeping on Pa's side of the bed. So I remember going to sleep over there, and next day, nice breakfast, and they'd bring me back to school, and I'd look forward to going back the next week. It was a really fun memory. Thank you.
Mary Jane Derderian. Now, my grandmother was Rose, Uncle Bob's sister, and my grandparents would take me to visit all my grandmother's brothers and sisters when I was young, and I just always remembered Uncle Bob and Aunt Joan as being so kind and welcoming, and just as many people have said, he never raised his voice. And my own mother would always tell me how Uncle Bob was the movie star of the family. He was the youngest, and he was so handsome, and he was so kind. And she always loved to tell everybody, they were only about 6.5 years apart, but she would always like to tell her friends how when she introduced them, that was her uncle. And everyone would say, how could that be your uncle? He's just a few years older than you. But that's the way the family lines went. But more than that, what I really want to say is Uncle Bob is the last of that generation of Ostrowskis. And the Ostrowskis are so important to me. I tell my own children, these I don't know how this works. These kids grew up and had such even though it was a hard life, it was so filled with love in that family that you could tell that, they grew up in Wimber. Their dad was a coal miner. And here they were, all of them grew up to be such kind and soft-spoken, mostly, and just such good citizens who loved this country and appreciated what they got from this country. And their parents being immigrants. Anytime my children complain about something, I tell them, your great-grandfather did not work in those mines, so you can sit and complain now. If these 10, 11 children, but 10 that grew up could have a good life and raise good children and good families, we owe it to them to have a good life and to carry on what they gave us, because they worked so hard. They never complained. They never talked about how hard it was. They just always encouraged us to have a good life and be happy. And I think that's something we all need to remember, because this was the last of that generation to go, to pass on. And please don't let that die with them. It's up to us to continue that and teach our own children how lucky and blessed we are to have them. And I'm so proud of being an Ostrowski on my mother's side, that I'll never forget any of this family, because I'm so proud of them. That's it.
Okay, I'll wrap this up, and just to comment on what you were saying. The stories that he would tell me, they would have, when it was bath time, they would bring a tub into the kitchen, fill it with hot water, and all of them would take a bath in it. One at a time. You didn't want to be the last one. And when winter was approaching and they had to start stocking up, they canned, they preserved, they did everything. And my dad, we went through, there's some pictures of his house in Wimber the last time we went through, and the man who owned it was kind enough to let us actually go through the house and take a tour of it. And he was like, oh yes, when we got our first toilet, and we put it down in the basement, and it was literally just a toilet, if you can imagine, in the middle of like a room. And so we wanted privacy, so they went out and they scavenged for bricks to build walls, basically the size of a toilet, so that they had some privacy. And they talked about, he would talk about how they would peel potatoes for the winter. And the amount of, I guess they were preserving or doing something with them, and the amount of the peelings, it would be as high as the ceiling. Like, that's how many they would peel. And the way they lived, I mean, I tried to document in the obituary some of the things he did when he was a very young child. You know, he's making a dime or something a month to watch some cows because the woman didn't have a fence, and it would cost her $2 if it went onto the farmland, neighbor's farm. And he was happy to do it. You know, he tried to join the army early, and he couldn't because he was too young. He tried to lie and get in, and so he wound up like working on the road, pounding tar, and he thought he was the luckiest guy in the world because he had a job and he was making some money. I mean, the perspective and the outlook and the appreciation, it boggles the mind. But anyway, I wrote a little something I'd like to read. My father was many things to me. A mentor, a tutor, a confidant, a business partner, a grandfather to my boys, and a horse dad. He was a great man by every metric. He had a dry wit, spoke softly to the point of mumbling, loved reading, especially history and politics, and he loved the United States of America. When I was little, I would ride on his shoulders and in his empty wheelbarrow as he worked around the yard. He called me Puppy. He was strong and kind, and he made me feel loved and protected. He made me laugh with tickles and jokes, kissed my boo-boos, and because of him, I believed that there was nothing I couldn't do. He taught me many life lessons. His advice was always spot on and delivered in such a way that even a teenager wouldn't take offense. These nuggets of truth have often become part of how I live my life. When he was teaching me to drive, someone tried to cut me off as I was making a right-hand turn. I was going to turn anyway, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I have the right-of-way." And he said, "Do you want to be right or dead?" That caused me to pause. As a driver, I still hear his voice in his head reminding me of this. And at some point, I started to incorporate this philosophy into the rest of my life, that being right isn't everything. As a horse dad, he came with me to every horse trial, pony club rally, combined test, and clinic. That made him my driver, my groom, my cheerleader, and most importantly, my psychologist. If you know horses, you understand. He cared so much for my horse Style. She was like a family pet. He would wake up at 2 a.m. on blustery winter nights to give her a bucket of grain so she would stay warm. No one asked him to do it. That was just who he was. As I grew older, he taught me the value of hard work. Being a hard worker was the highest compliment he could bestow on you. He was the most laid-back perfectionist I've ever known. Every house my parents owned was a work of art, both inside and out. He was obsessed with all of them, and it showed. The first house we lived in was a constant work in progress. Really, all of them were. He designed an elaborate patio with beautiful detailed walls, which his neighbor Bill Wright helped him build. The interior was perfection. He did all the work himself. And when we moved, the people that bought the house lived in it for decades, and they never changed a thing, ever. They dusted the walls so that They never had to paint or change the wallpaper. It was a testament to the beauty and quality of his workmanship. On the art table is an exact replica of the fireplace in that house. He was such a perfectionist and a bit of a procrastinator, so it's the only thing he completed in the dollhouse he was trying to build me years ago. As most of you know, he and my mother designed and built the house that they lived in for over 50 years. It was a labor of love for both of them. And it's hard for me to communicate to you his work ethic and the level of detail he constantly strove for, but I will try. Once the interior projects were under control but never finished, they had endless plans for things. He focused more on the landscaping. Like a bonsai artist with small clippers, he sculpted the trees in front of the house into ascending spirals, 2 stories. Each bit of mulch was laid 1 handful at a time, and he would even go so far as to vacuum the plants after he mulched. That was my dad. He never had a bad word to say about anyone, and that's the truth. He always saw the best in people. He had a strong moral compass, was trusting, trustworthy, and very intelligent. His word was his bond. He loved to problem solve and took great pride in creating solutions that helped others and made things work smoother. He loved to help people, and I remember one time in particular that to me exemplifies his incredible character. I had just started working for him at Expedite, soon to become Prestar. He was driving with me to work one rainy morning, going from Clarksville to Silver Spring by way of Rockville. Check your Google Maps. We had several customers over there, so I didn't think anything of it. He passed one customer street without turning and goes down an odd street, slows down, looks, moves on, and repeats this twice. On the 3rd street, he slows and stops in front of a bus stop, and a strange man hops in the car. My dad turns to me and says, "Don't worry." They discuss the weather and how their families are, and in 2 or 3 miles, he pulls over, and the man thanks him, and he gets out. Jaw on the ground, I turn to him and ask him, "Who was that?" First, he vehemently says to me, "Don't you ever pick up hitchhikers or strangers under any circumstances." Twice. Then he tells me the story in a very humble and unassuming way, as if, of course, this is what everybody does. One day he had noticed a man standing in the sleet and snow waiting for a bus. He'd seen that man before when he was in the area. So on this day, he offered to take him to work so that he didn't have to wait in the bad weather. The man was grateful and accepted. Over time, my father found 2 more men in the same predicament and had since made it his job to pick them up for work whenever the weather was bad. According to my dad, he'd only been doing it for a couple of years. That was my dad. He made me believe that I could do anything. It never occurred to me that there was any limit on my ability to achieve whatever I wanted to. He praised my hard work, and he rescued me many times when I found myself in too deep. He brought me into the printing industry, though I had to beg him. He hated nepotism, and he showed me the ropes. It was there that I met my husband, Bob. He had hired him many years before, and it was an easy step for my dad to love him like a son. Eventually, we started Doloff Printing, and one could not ask for a better business partner. When our sons were born, we brought them to work nearly every day until they started school. There were 4 of us, as my mom was in the business too, passing them around and playing with them. It was sometimes hard to get things done, but what a blessing that we had this family business allowing our children to be raised by multiple generations. I'm a lot like him at work. It's organized clutter. People who know him understand what I mean. After I started at Press Star, one of my first achievements was cleaning his office. It was a good-sized office with a desk and 2 chairs, one in front, one in back. There were magazines all over the floor. I mean, all over. There was nothing except a sliver of carpet that led to his chair and to the chair across from him. His desk had about 8 inches of paperwork across the top with this little dip where he worked. And the inbox was like a chimney stack. It was something to behold. I don't know if you remember. It took weeks, but I cleaned it up, working with him one tiny scrap at a time. What do you want to do with this? Do you need to call this person? Is this any good anymore? One little scrap at a time for weeks. When it was completed, everyone, customers, vendors, everyone in the shop stopped by to marvel at my work. No one ever thought that could be done, cleaning it up. He loved being with friends, especially when they were all playing horseshoes and golfing. He bought me my first set of golf clubs in a baby blue bag. Some of the best times I had with my dad were out on the golf course, playing with him and my husband in the printing industry's best ball tournaments. When his eyesight went and he could no longer drive, his friends would pick him up to play until eventually he could only ride around in the cart with him. He really loved golf. My father was a medical miracle and an agreeable patient, which is a good thing, because he battled various cancers throughout his life, starting in his 20s. It took 70 years for the big C to finally get him. He survived and came back strong from multiple strokes. He lived with 1 kidney for over 30 years. He suffered from macular degeneration for nearly a third of his life. And there's more, the list is impressive. But you never heard him complain or discuss his problems with anyone. They were merely speed bumps and obstacles to be worked around. He did not let them slow him down. He remained upbeat, optimistic, and kept on doing the things he loved. As an artist, he used his talent to make gifts for others, especially his family. What is left is mostly the sketches and designs of the pieces he created. On the boards are some of this work, and in the binder on the coffee table out there are cards and announcements that he created over the years. To say that I love my dad is an understatement. He was so many things to me, and I was blessed to not only have had him for 93 years, but also to have had him as such a big part of my life. His legacy of love and support will continue to live on through my children and theirs. I could not have had a better father, and I miss him every day. So now this portion of the evening is done. I'll start to call your tables in a little bit, and then you can go and help yourself to the buffet. If you haven't had a chance, please go look at the photos, the artwork. There's a video of him that Bailey worked on, which is sitting out on the table behind the couch. If you put the earphones on, you can hear his voice. The tape was made a couple weeks before he went downhill and went into the hospital, and he's talking about his life. And I think it's pretty nifty. Anyway, I also wanted to say, let me know if you would like a centerpiece. We have some of these available. They're actually candle holders, so that when the flowers go, we would give you a glass insert that you could put in and use it as a candle holder, the cage. Again, thank you all for coming and sharing your memories with us. It means more than you could ever know. It is such a testament to the man he was. And thank you.